HOA Karen stole my power for weeks, not knowing it fueled her own sewage line. Why would a neighbor cut off your electricity and still expect her house to stay clean? I found out the hard way when I moved into a fixer-upper on the edge of Cypress Bluffs, a gated community that didn't technically include my property. But that didn't stop them from trying to control it. I was a renewable systems engineer, newly retired from the city utility, and I'd poured my savings into restoring an old off-grid homestead powered entirely by solar. The land came with a 30-year-old infrastructure tanks, panels, even an underground grid rerouted decades ago during a failed community project. What I didn't know then was that a piece of that infrastructure still quietly served one house. And it belonged to Karen. I met her on day 3. "You're in violation of multiple HOA ordinances," she barked, stepping across the property line in heels that clearly weren't meant for gravel. "I'm not in your HOA," I replied, calm but firm. "Never was. Never will be." She gave me a smirk like I was a child who didn't know how the world worked. "We'll see what the board thinks." First, it was petty stuff. Notes left on my fence about unsightly solar batteries. Her dog relieving itself right on my inverter box. But then, one morning, the power failed. Completely. My backup battery bank showed 0 input from my primary solar relay. No power meant no filtration, no internet, no refrigeration. I lived off that system. I spent 3 days checking wiring, panels, and software. The solar array was untouched, but the underground conduit that connected it to my central hub had been sliced and rerouted. Clean cut. Fresh clamp marks. I traced the reroute up the slope and get T-sit terminated right at the crawlspace beneath Karen's home. The next night, I got my confirmation. My thermal cam lit up like Christmas heat flowing directly from my inverter box to her side of the hill. She'd stolen my power. But I didn't confront her yet. I installed a hidden monitor to track usage. For 2 full weeks, Karen's house pulled power from my grid, cooking, lighting, even HVAC. While I camped out using a generator I had to refill twice a day. Then came the stink. Karen hosted some HOA wine tasting event, but within an hour, the guests scattered like flies. Something horrific bubbled up through her backyard. Raw sewage. I watched from my hilltop porch, sipping lemon water, as she screamed at the sky. That's when it hit me. Years ago, the HOA's gray water management project was abandoned halfway through, but not before they had connected Karen's waste line to an auxiliary pump system. The same one quietly powered by my grid. For decades, after the HOA forgot to maintain it. When I cut off her illegal draw, the pump died and everything she flushed came right back. I didn't even have to touch her house. Her own arrogance dug the grave. The moment I turned off the breaker, justice literally rose from the ground. Karen tried to play the victim the very next day. She marched up my driveway, mud still caked on her designer heels, eyes wide like she was in a horror movie, and screamed, "You sabotaged my septic system. My yard is ruined. I'm calling the HOA and the police." "You mean the same HOA I'm not a part of?" I replied, calm as ever. I held up my tablet and tapped the screen. Live feed. Infrared. Power flow history. "Karen, I've got 2 weeks of data showing you siphoned electricity from my system. Illegally. That's utility theft. And it just so happens that your waste system has been riding on my grid for years." She blinked. Once. Twice. Then screamed, "You're lying." "Nope," I said, popping open a folder of archived city plans. "See this diagram? Your sewage line was rerouted into a pump station funded by a grant project in 1997. It was never connected to municipal utilities again. It's been running on my backup grid ever since. Without that electricity, it doesn't work. You stole from me. You broke the law. And now, it's all come back up." I expected her to run back down the hill, but she doubled down. "I am the HOA vice president, and I will have your property condemned." That was her mistake. Because standing behind her, arms crossed, was someone she didn't recognize, Thomas Salazar, a state energy compliance officer. He'd been my mentor before I retired. I called him in once I confirmed the theft. "Actually," Tomas said, stepping forward, "I'm with the Department of Utility Infrastructure and Renewable Oversight. You've tampered with an independent energy grid. which is a Class C felony under state code. And if your HOA benefited from this in any way, the entire board may be liable. Karen's mouth fell open. You can't be serious. We already traced the voltage spike to your property, and we know your HOA buried that old sewage pump without permits. So yes, ma'am, I'm very serious. Twist. Tomas wasn't just there for me. Turns out, he'd flagged the HOA 2 years ago during an audit, but they dodged inspection by blaming a retired system on my side of the property line. They'd used me as a scapegoat without me even knowing. You've been laundering infrastructure failures through a private citizen's grid, Tomas said flatly. You're lucky all you lost was a lawn. Karen started sobbing. Not graceful tears, the kind that twist a face into something desperate and cracked. Her hands trembled as she clutched her phone, begging for someone to pick up, probably her HOA lawyer. But Tomas wasn't done. We've also subpoenaed your HOA's records, including those community emails you sent last week bragging about cutting off the hillbilly squatter's power. I smiled at that one. And your camera footage? I added. The one you installed on my property line, which accidentally captured you clipping the conduit with bolt cutters. It's already been turned over. Her legs buckled. For the first time, Karen sat in her own front yard, right beside the stink. The same ground she once manicured like it was royal property. By the end of that week, the charges started rolling in. Trespassing, theft, illegal modification of energy systems, environmental endangerment, Ohan City Records fraud. Once they discovered she had declared her home fully on municipal utilities for tax breaks, the HOA dissolved. Tomas's department launched a full investigation, and 3 other board members quietly resigned. One of them actually came to apologize, said he never realized Karen had hardwired her home into the old pump system. Apparently, she told them I volunteered to provide backup power. Let that sink in. She built her throne on lies, then burned it down by trying to destroy me. By the time her trial came around, Karen had lost nearly everything: her job, her home equity, and her social standing. Neighbors she once lorded over now crossed the street to avoid her. Contractors refused to work on her yard. HOA members formed a new group, this time with public oversight and strict bylaws to prevent another Karen from rising. And me? I restored my grid, reinforced it, added even more safeguards, this time with legal insulation so no one, not even the city, could touch it without my approval. The property now runs smoother than ever. I even got a refund on fuel costs, courtesy of a civil suit settlement. But you know what stuck with me? Not the smell, not the stress, not even the brief feeling of revenge. It was something Tomas said that evening, when we stood watching Karen's yard get cordoned off by the city crew in hazmat suits. Justice isn't always loud. Sometimes it hums like a well-built generator waiting to be heard. And that's exactly what I became: a quiet hum of truth, outlasting the noise. Karen didn't disappear quietly, not at first. Even after the city taped off half her yard and the local news picked up the sewage story under the headline "Power Theft Sparks Biohazard in Cypress Bluffs," she still tried to claw her way back into relevance. She filed a motion to delay her court date, claimed the evidence was tampered with, and even told reporters I'd set her up with underground sabotage. But no one was buying it anymore. Even the HOA members who had once nodded along at her wine and cheese meetings now left her on red. I heard one of them, Mrs. Ellison, a sweet old widow who once defended Karen, say to her, "We were fools to follow you. That man kept our sewage pumping without asking a dime. And you spit on him." That's when Karen stopped showing her face. Her porch light went out. Her curtains stayed closed. Her yard, once trimmed down to the millimeter, grew wild and patchy. But just when I thought the storm was over, something happened that nearly made me doubt everything I'd fought for. A man came knocking at my door. He looked to be in his early 60s, weathered like someone who'd seen too many summers, but dressed sharp, boots shined, collar pressed. I opened the door cautiously. "You're the guy on the hill?" he asked, voice slow like molasses but strong. "The one Karen tried to bury?" I nodded. "My name's Ronald, Karen's ex-husband." I stepped aside. Go on. We sat on my porch, overlooking the ridge. He took a long breath. I was married to her for 18 years. When we split, I gave her that house in the divorce because she claimed she needed stability for her public role. I never thought she'd weaponize it. She almost wrecked my life, I said flatly. She tried to wreck mine too. You're not the first. Ronald reached into his jacket and pulled out a flash drive. This is from back when I was forced to digitize all her HOA records. She bullied the board into having me do it for free since I worked in IT. I found some things I didn't have the guts to expose at the time. I plugged the drive into my laptop that night, and what I found made my blood run cold. Emails. Dozens of them. Going back years. Karen had been doctoring utility documents, forging electronic signatures, and even blacklisting homeowners from meetings who opposed her projects. She'd redirected fines meant for real violations onto properties she didn't like. She labeled my parcel Rogue Squatter Lot in multiple memos even before I moved in. One folder was labeled Pump Project. Keep quiet. In it, Karen wrote to the original board, if we tell the community the sewage pump's powered by off-grid tech on non-HOA land, we'll have a riot. Just say it's city-managed. They knew. All of them. But Karen led the deception. I forwarded the entire drive to Tomas, who added it to the case file. It became the final nail in the coffin. The city reclassified the HOA as a fraudulent operation, citing systemic abuse and infrastructural misrepresentation. Civil suits stacked up like bricks. And for the cherry on top, the local paper ran a follow-up article titled, The Queen of Bluffs Built Her Throne on Stolen Power. Karen's final appearance in public came 2 weeks later, at the county courthouse. She looked nothing like the woman who used to stride around in pearls and pressed suits. Her hair was disheveled. No makeup, just a pale, haunted look like the truth had finally stripped her to the bone. The judge handed down a 6-month sentence reduced due to her clean prior record, but with steep restitution fines and court-mandated community service. Not the hard time some of us hoped for, but enough to shatter the illusion she clung to. She didn't speak a word when they cuffed her. After the verdict, Ronald and I stood outside the courthouse. He offered me a handshake. You stood your ground. She hated that. I didn't want this fight, I said. But I wasn't going to let her steal my life. He nodded. Funny thing is, she always hated weakness. But in the end, she only picked fights with people who didn't fight back until you. Weeks passed. The HOA was officially dissolved. My property line was redrawn and re-verified by the county. The city installed new signs acknowledging the independence of my land and off-grid infrastructure. And me? I got letters. Dozens. One was from a boy named Caleb, a student at the local high school. He said my story inspired his science fair project on renewable energy. Another was from a retired couple who'd been fined thousands by Karen's board for unauthorized Christmas decorations. They were finally getting refunds. One envelope stood out handwritten, no return address. Inside was a simple note. I watched what she did to you. I wish I had spoken up sooner. Thank you for not backing down. L. I never found out who L was. Maybe someone who once feared Karen too much to speak. That's when I realized this wasn't just about power. It was about silence. About what happens when people stop speaking up until someone refuses to shut up. And that person this time happened to be me. The weeks after Karen's sentencing felt like the first real breath of air I'd taken in months. I could walk down the ridge trail without watching my back. No more HOA letters taped to my gate. No strange power dips. No cameras trained on my windows. It was quiet, eerily Sabbath. I welcomed the stillness like an old friend I hadn't seen in years. But peace has a way of uncovering things you miss during chaos. One afternoon, as I was clearing debris from an old utility trench along the southern edge of my land, I uncovered a cracked PVC junction box with a faded HOA seal. Curious, I followed the cable deeper. It stretched farther than expected, snaking beneath the earth like a hidden vein, and led me to a locked hatch embedded near the old trailhead. Something Karen clearly didn't want anyone to find. I used my bolt cutters. Inside the hatch was a rusted-out electrical panel and a shortwave transmitter. I'd seen models like this during my city grid days used by some associations to ping smart meters or log usage remotely. But this one had been jury-rigged to do more. It was sending data. I called in Tomas. He ran a quick scan. "This thing's been active until about a month ago," he muttered, crouching beside the box. "Low-frequency data pings. Could have been monitoring your system or rerouting data to another board." "Spying?" I asked. "Spying. Theft. Maybe both." When Karen lost power, she didn't just panic about sewage. She likely lost access to the one thing that kept her lie running. Information. She had tapped into my system and pretended it was HOA controlled. Maybe even used it to back up her claims to local inspectors or auditors. The transmitter was the final thread of her little empire. We took photos, logged coordinates. Tomas submitted a supplemental report. And just like that, Karen's sentence was extended violation of municipal telecom code and tampering with energy monitoring systems. No bail this time. That discovery made the local news again. But this time, the focus wasn't just Karen's crime, it was the community's silence. People started asking hard questions. Why had the HOA operated without checks for so long? Why did no one speak up when Karen rewired the rules? And then came the public meeting. The city organized it for homeowners who'd been affected by the now-defunct HOA. The turnout was larger than expected, over 100 residents. Some of them in tears, many holding folders, fines, violation slips. I sat quietly in the back until someone spotted me and the room began to applaud. I didn't know what to do with that. A woman stood up near the front. Her name was Dina. She looked to be in her 40s, a teacher maybe. She held up a laminated notice. This was a $500 fine for planting native flowers. She said they were weeds, but I planted them for the pollinators. For the kids in my science club. Another man raised his voice. "I lost my garden because she called it a fire hazard. Took me 5 years to build that orchard." One by one, people shared stories. Petty fines, threats, public shaming at HOA meetings. Families driven to sell. Children scolded for chalk drawings on driveways. Karen had built her power not through force but through fear. And it worked until someone said enough. When they asked me to speak, I stood slowly. My knees ached, but my voice didn't. "I never asked to be a symbol," I said. "I just wanted to be left alone." But when someone starts stealing from you, silencing you, and sabotaging the very land you live on, what choice do you have but to stand up? I paused. Let the silence breathe. You can't build community on control. You build it on respect, on truth. And that means holding people accountable even when they smile to your face. The crowd gave a standing ovation. After the meeting, a group approached me about starting a new neighborhood council without HOA powers, just a shared stewardship agreement. A gardener, a retired nurse, a young couple raising their first baby. They wanted to rebuild what Karen had broken, not with punishment, but with care. And I said yes, because it wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about repair. That's when I made one final decision. I took the last of my settlement money and invested it into something Karen would have had: a free public energy workshop. I opened it up to students, retired engineers, and homeowners curious about going off-grid. I called it the Power Exchange, a not-for-profit that taught people how to take back their energy, their voices, and their rights. We held the first session under the oaks behind my house. 30 people showed up. 2 of them, former HOA members. "I didn't realize," one of them said quietly. "Now you do," I replied. "And now you can." It wasn't about punishment anymore. Not really. It was about lighting a fire where Karen once left darkness. And it worked. My land became more than just a quiet ridge. It became a beacon, a reminder, a warning. You can bully a neighborhood. You can fake authority. You can even steal power. But someday, somewhere, that power will surge back. And when it does, it won't be kind. Spring returned to Cypress Bluffs with an unfamiliar scent in the air: freedom. No more HOA patrols. No clipboard inspections. No Karen barking orders from behind her tinted windows. The sidewalks bloomed with chalk art. Flags fluttered freely. People planted what they wanted. painted their doors without permission, and finally waved to each other like neighbors, not suspects. And still, part of me wondered, was it really over? I got my answer one afternoon when a young woman knocked on my door. She was carrying a toddler on her hip and had soft, worry lines across her forehead. Her name was Elise, and she just bought the lot 2 houses down from where Karen used to live. She looked hesitant, apologetic even. "Sorry to bother you," she said. I heard what happened. People said you were the one who stood up to all that mess. I just wanted to say thank you." I invited her in, offered her lemonade and a seat on the deck, where the sunlight poured through the oak leaves above us. Her son cooed happily in her arms. "My husband's deployed," she said. "We bought this place for peace. But I was scared when I found out about what the HOA used to be." "Not anymore," I said, smiling gently. "It's yours now. The neighborhood's finally yours." She smiled, and in her expression, I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Relief. Real breathing peace. She looked out toward the slope where Karen's house still sat empty, boarded up, overgrown. A shell of the power it once symbolized. "I walk past it sometimes," she said. "It gives me the creeps." I nodded. That place tried to become a throne. But thrones built on fear don't last. She looked over at me. "What will happen to it?" I thought for a moment. "I've heard the county's considering turning it into a wildlife education site. Some kind of regenerative garden project. Would be fitting, don't you think?" She chuckled softly. "Poetic." That night, I walked the trail behind my house, something I used to do before the conflict began. Fireflies blinked in the brush. A pair of deer stepped through the clearing near the old sewage line, now permanently sealed and marked for ecological restoration. Nature, like truth, always finds a way to reclaim what's been misused. And I realized something. Karen was never just one woman. She was a symbol of something larger. The system that lets control masquerade as community. The silence people accept just to keep their lawns green and their neighbors quiet. The way fear creeps in, slow and subtle, until one day it's too loud to ignore. But when you stand up, when you expose the rot, people do listen. Not all at once, not right away, but slowly, steadily, like water through cracked stone. Months later, the first class of the Power Exchange graduated. One of the students, an 11-year-old named Jordan, built his own solar tracker and asked me to test it. I nearly cried when it worked. His mom hugged me after class and whispered, "You gave him more than a project. You gave him power." Karen never came back to Cypress Bluffs. Rumor was she moved to Florida to live with her sister, who refused to let her near the HOA board. Her real estate license was revoked. Her name became shorthand for everything the community wanted to forget and everything it promised to never allow again. But I didn't want to forget. Couldn't. Because remembering Karen wasn't about hate. It was about warning. About choosing courage the next time someone tries to take power that doesn't belong to them. A year to the day since I cut the power line she stole, I installed a small wooden bench beneath the oaks on the ridge. I carved a message into the backrest. Not a name, not a threat, just words I hoped would outlive all of this. Power is not what you take, it's what you protect. That bench became a quiet meeting place. Couples sat there with coffee. Kids climbed it to look for squirrels. I saw someone read the inscription once, nod solemnly, and whisper something to themselves before walking away lighter than when they arrived. And me? I stayed, still on the ridge, still off-grid, still watching the sun rise over a town that finally remembered what it meant to be a town. And every once in a while, someone new asks me why I fought so hard, why I didn't walk away when Karen made my life hell, why I pressed charges, gathered evidence, showed up in court, faced the cameras, stayed standing when others said, "Just let it go." I always give them the same answer. Because she stole more than power. She tried to steal peace. And I wasn't about to let her get away with that. So now I ask you, if someone like Karen came for your land, your energy, your dignity, would you fight back? Or would you wait for someone else to do it for you? Tell me below. Your voice might be the one that saves someone else's peace.